And I do want to start off by saying a big thank you for those who were able to make it out to the conference this weekend with Boom Church. Big shout out to Bishop Brown for the invite, and the fellowship was outstanding. Family, if you were able to make it out there, and I was able to shake your hand, thank you, thank you, thank you. I mean, we did have some brothers and sisters that traveled, far and near to make it out there. So it was a blessing to put a name with a face, and and just to hear your testimonies, fam. You all don't know how far that goes as far as helping to keep us moving forward. When we're able to see the fruits of the labors that we're putting in. So yeah, thank you, family, for sharing your testimonies. And of course, always a big shout out to our elders, our chief elders, over at Rebirth. Peace and blessings out to our families over there. Peace and blessings to our emas, our ox, and our kotis, brothers and sisters in this faith. So peace and blessings to you guys, fam, and peace and blessings to everyone that's in the chat. Thank you everyone for joining in and dialing in for this impromptu lesson. So basically, what happened, fam, to just kind of give you some background on what took place at the conference. When it was my turn to give just give a quick presentation, because we really only had like 30 minutes to do a presentation. And when it was my turn to do the presentation, I did have some issues with the PowerPoint. There were some video clips in there that didn't quite play right, so didn't necessarily get a chance to review all the information with with everyone there in the room, and those that were online at the time as well. So I didn't want to just I promised to some of the folks that were there that I would put some of these clips online, and kind of review some of that which we talked about, which is why we have this live at this this live right now. So with that being said, I'm just going to, like I said, just briefly touch on some of the information that we reviewed during the conference. It wasn't a whole lot, fam. Like I said, you can't really go into a whole lot at these when you only have like 35 minutes or 30 minutes or so. But what I did do is that I used that as an opportunity to give a state of the union of sorts on the awakening. So as I know that we do have a lot of new people that join the channel. One of our how can I put, our charters, our marching orders is to awaken, restore, prepare. That's awaken, restore, prepare. And thanks be to the Most High Yah that He's allowed me to participate in the awakening part. So that's the ministry or the direction of this particular channel, is that we play a major role, or we hope to play a major role in the awakening. And so that's why you see all these YouTube videos, all the information that we're putting out. We're trying to help awaken our people, right? And and I do see a season of when that might that will change, when we'll move to a different charter. But for now, we are how can I put it, my charter is to help awaken our people. And thank you for for everyone that participates by helping to share these videos. We couldn't get this message out without you guys. We couldn't get this message out to our people without you all that are sharing this message out at kitchen tables, whenever you're out with your families. That was one of the testimonies, actually multiple testimonies that we got at the conference, was that you guys were sharing these videos with family and friends, and praise the Most High that they were making an impact. I think one brother out there praise the Most High, he shared it with his wife, and at first he got pushback from that, but just over time the Most High pricked her heart, and she eventually came over, and she was awakened as well. So just like I said, just testimonials like that, fam, they go a long way to help us stay up these late hours, long hours, to put this work in, just to help do our part to make sure this awakening moves forward. So thank you. Continue to send your feedback in, fam. Continue to help support the channel. Thank you, family, for those who have helped support the channel financially, also through your prayers, family. That goes a long way. So just keep it up, because we are in a new season. definitely a new season, as you can see. I'm looking at the chat, so shout out to everyone that's in the chat, fam. And like I said, at the conference, one of the things we talked about was this new season that we're in the awakening. If you look back over the course of time and we look at the awakening, you'll see that for those that were awake early, believe it or not, there were some folks that were awake like during the in the 80s. I can't believe that. I'm wondering what was I doing in the 80s? I had no idea that this movement was alive and kicking in the 80s. But yeah, there were some people that was alive back then that were sounding the alarm, blowing the shofar, saying that, hey, we are the people of the book. And of course, they didn't necessarily have all the resources and references that we do today, but they were putting that work in. And then later on, we started to have some of the what I call the forerunners, the leaders of this awakening. And that's where you had I put the brother's video on this channel. Yerushalayim, brother Drawback Jacob, he was one of the ones that was out there. Pastor Darby, he was one of the ones that I came across his channel when I became aware and awake. And yeah, I mean, they just like you guys, they helped open my eyes and helped me to motivated me to start digging a little bit deeper into this rabbit hole that we're in. So, but so shortly after that, there was, to me, like there was this explosion of information. When we kind of unlocked figured out the combination on the safe as far as what our history is concerned, and that is, we started to learn that, hey, if we were to look at old references, books that were published before like 1850, all of a sudden we noticed that the history was different. The history would say things like the Jews are black, especially when you looked at the brews of Spain and Portugal, because reason why we started there was because those were the nations that started the transatlantic slave trade. And of course, when we looked at the old books confirmed that we were the people, or at least the people that they were brown, black, all those synonyms and definitions you can come up with to describe a melanated people. That's what the books described, from Spain and Portugal. And then, of course, when we looked at the history, we found out that those, people that were in Spain and Portugal, they were placed on the west coast of Africa in great numbers. They were placed, in the transatlantic slave trade ships. We confirmed that by looking at the slave manifest. We did an analysis of the names. We looked at the, cranial analysis of the brews that were back in Spain, and we confirmed that they were Negroes because they had dolichocephalic skulls. DNA, when we ran our own personal DNA here, over whether we're here in the States or back over on the continent of Africa, some of us were surprised to see that we had DNA markers or hits over in Spain and Portugal, confirming what we've been teaching all along. It was just confirmation that the Most High confirmed what we were bringing out, and that was a blessing. And so, so over time, just more and more information came out, more and more references came out, proof. You have these outstanding movies. You have, Reclaiming the Thrones. I do want to encourage anyone that's still, kind of searching and looking for information. I do want to, highly encourage you, highly recommend Reclaiming the Thrones, and also, Brother Ron Dalton's book, of course. Book and movie. Hebrews and Negroes, but definitely check out Reclaiming the Thrones, family. It's actually available for free. Now, you can't be free, right? On Tubi TV. That's TUBI TV. If you don't have the app, just download the app on your phone or smart device, and then you can take a look at it. And the only thing is that, like I said, it'll have commercials in it, but I think you can put up with the commercials, especially if you don't have to pay anything for it. And I'm sure that most of you already know that there's a Reclaiming the Thrones 2 in the works that Chief Elder Yahushua and Moshe are working on. So, and that one's going to be, just as impactful and enlightening as the other one. Actually, I think it's going to be way more to that one as far as impact, to the so-called Black community than the first one. Because it has a lot to do with us here in the States. It unveils a lot of that that last 10 feet, so to speak, as far as what our history is concerned, what happened to us when we got here in the States. And actually that kind of leads into where we are today, right? So once all this information came out, we determined that with all this information that we are the people of the book. Like I said, I didn't necessarily have a time to kind of go through everything that proves that we are the people of the book, but definitely, I mean, there's, like I said, there's books, there's DNA. We're coming up with new ways to prove who we are via DNA. There's the oral history, our names. A lot of us are walking around today with Spanish and Portuguese brew names, and we don't even know it, right? It's funny because remember when Charles Barkley and Shaquille O'Neal were going in on Kyrie Irving, not too long ago, and it's funny because guess whose name is Sephardic? Charles Barkley. I mean, you can literally find Charles, Barkley, his last name, his surname, in these Sephardic Israelite books. And here he is going in on Kyrie with a Sephardic Israelite name on his back shirt. You can't get any more hypocritical than that. But since this awakening has come, there was the initial how can I say, the wave of people waking up, me, you, a lot of people on this live. We were, part of that second, I guess you can call it like a second wave, because the first wave would have been those that were around in the 1980s. But so, yeah, I would call us the second wave. And then the third wave was this big wave that came about, first you had, seems like Kanye kind of started it, but then Kyrie really, started the wave with the infamous tweet that was heard all around the world. And it's funny because you can actually, and I don't joke about that either. I mean, you can actually find articles about this in the Israel Times magazine, Israel Times, right? So they were actually tracking this what's going on over here, over there, across the water. And so, yeah, I mean, so when the Kyrie issue happened, and then Black folks as a whole started noticing that, hey, wow, these guys are really, kind of overreacting to a tweet. I mean, just a tweet with no letters, no text to go along with it. And Black folks started to, they started to look. They started to try to figure out like what's going on. People were inquisitive, and they started looking at the movie, and then it was called anti-Semitic and all this other stuff. And then people were looking at it and they couldn't find things that were anti-Semitic. So in other words, it wasn't as bad as folks were trying to drum it up to be, especially, in this case, it was the ADL and Friends. And it fanned the flames. And, the Most High used that like within an instant, you had people around the world, waking up to who we are, and this was, what I told our brothers and sisters, at the conference, I said, as long as we were, we were working in these small isolated groups, these little islands, so to speak, as far as our congregations and our assemblies, and as long as the awakening stayed there, it stayed localized, it stayed small, then they weren't worried about it. When I say they, of course, I mean like the powers to be, right? But once this thing caught fire and it spread and it went global, Kyrie's text or tweet, and this thing just took off, and now it's all over mainstream media. Everyone's chiming in on it, all this stuff. Then it became a problem. This is when a lot of us, and I'm pretty sure, hopefully, I think it happened to you too, but I started getting comments from family, from family members I had been trying to reach for a long time, and all of a sudden they calling me out of the blue, say, "Hey, cuz, yeah, I know you into that Israelite stuff," and I'm looking like, man, this thing's for real. This awakening's for real. That's when I knew, what I'm saying, like we were in this new phase of the awakening, and that's when I also knew that you started to see that the enemies that we were dealing with, or the antagonists that we as African Israelites, I'm gonna use that term, African Israelites, were dealing with, it started to change, right? Because before the antagonists were, like the local churches, maybe the, folks would say the urban apologists, some of these, these small fries, so to speak, folks that would come up and try to stop the awakening. But as soon as this thing got caught fire and it went around the world, man, fam, this thing, as far as our enemies, we started to see some people rise up against the Black community that we hadn't really seen rise up against the Black community before. You know what I mean? Like the ADL, for example, came out of the woodwork, especially when Kanye, did his thing, and then when Kyrie was there, of course they came against him. But then all of a sudden we started to see this systematic attack against the African Israelite community, right, across the board. And so maybe you're wondering, so what are you talking about, Brother Benai? What kind of sort of attacks that are you seeing? Well, this is kind of one of the things I wanted to bring to light before we got into the King David lesson here. But one of the things that we started to see was, and you've if you're subscribed to the channel, hopefully you are, please subscribe to the channel if you're able to. But one of the things that of course I posted out there, I showed you how Jonathan Greenblatt, who's the CEO of the ADL, how they started to put this narrative out there that, hey, these guys are violent. These guys who identify, not that we necessarily identify ourselves as Black Hebrew Israelites, like that's not our term, but the term that they placed on us, then they started to, transform this term or this people into some sort of aggressive, violent people, which is not who we are. Because there's no, unless, hey fam, put this in the chat. Have you ever had been told to commit violence as a Black Hebrew Israelite? Put in the chat, fam. Have you ever been told to commit violence, within a lesson as a Black Hebrew Israelite? Have you ever gone to an assembly and your more, your teacher, ever told you to commit violence? Have you ever heard that? Yes, I mean, if you look at the chat, fam, you'll see no, never, nope, never, nope, right? And that is across the board. Like that is not a lesson that even comes into our vocabulary. But the ADL seemed to be bent on making that our narrative, and it is not our narrative. Like, just for the benefit of those that are new, that may be dialing in for the first time, right? I'm just your brother, right? At the end of the day, I'm just your brother, and this is just one opinion. But what I've been taught and what I've been told and what I believe is that just as the Israelites came out of Egypt will be the same way that we come out of this, we call spiritual Egypt. And that is, it is going to be by the hand of the Most High, right? It's going to be the hand of the Most High that's going to force Pharaoh to let us go, to send us out, to kick us out, right? It's not going to be us, right? By no hands, by not taking up any arms or anything like that. Like that's not even in our belief. So, and it's not in the book as far as I know, right? So if you're, so when they try to say that, hey, these, like I said, don't get mad when I'm saying Black Hebrew Israelite. This it's their term. But when they say like these Black Hebrew Israelites are going around and shooting, and then they say things like, oh, but I did it because you're not the real Jews. Like that's not some doctrine that's taught in any of our places, as far as I know. It's like it's not in our doctrine. But that is what the ADL is trying their hardest to do, and that's why. And actually, let me pull up my slide here so I can show you, fam. Might be easier to show you. So hopefully you can see the slide on the screen. And so this is what you're looking at, fam, is like the ADL's website. So on their website, they literally have a page for Black Hebrew Israelites, right? And of course, like the first thing they talk about on the page is like the New Jersey City attack, right? Black Hebrew Israelite, which was the one that actually, let's see if I have it here in the next slide. Well, it's a couple of slides down, but anyway, but that's the one that the Attorney General of New Jersey said that, hey, we don't find any links between these two guys. They were interested in the Black Hebrew Israelites, which was somebody thought that they had saw the suspects in an informational line of Israelites 4 years prior to the incident. Come on now, fam. They reaching 4 years prior to that incident in New Jersey. Someone kind of sort of thought they saw these suspects in an informational line. Come on, fam. So that's how, I mean, that just kind of goes to show how hard they're trying to come up with this narrative. I refer to it as character assassination is what they're doing. But let me just show you a few things here about the ADL, fam. So this is their website, right? Black Hebrew Israelites. And one of the things that, you'll hear them say over and over again, like this is from their website. They'll say, anti-Semitic incidents reached an all-time high in the United States in 2021, a total of 2,717 incidents. Now, having tracked, we started to kind of track this organization, especially when the Kyrie and Kanye stuff started to come out, and we started to see them, these guys kind of position themselves as the antagonists of African Israelites. So we started to track them, their websites and stuff like that, just to get an idea of what sort of information or lies that they were saying against our community. And of course, we started to notice of some discrepancies. Like this is one. So on their webpage, they'll say things like, anti-Semitic incidents. When you see it, fam, it says, total of 2,717 incidents, right? And so, of course, we always like to verify and confirm. So we went over to the FBI's website, and let's see what the FBI has. So this is still the ADL's website. They have nice charts and stuff like that to kind of break down their what they believe were their 2,717 incidents, right? You even have a map. But when you go over to the FBI's website, this is the FBI hate crime, during the same time period, 2021. And you'll see, of course, we at the top, fam. We are at the top, right? As far as having, being the receiver of hate, blacks, because we, like I said, this ought to show you that we are the people of the book, because those curses will make you stand out when they compare. Somebody else tries to compare, what you're going through with them, right? So anyway, but you'll see it, fam. So we're at the top of the list as far as the I don't even want to use benefactors, but the receivers of hate crimes. But then you'll see that it says Jewish down here is, it's kind of small on my screen, but I believe that's 300. Next, let me see if I can expand it. There we go. 324, right? And so you'll notice, so that's a big discrepancy between that and this 2,717. So, like I said, fam, what you'll notice is that there's discrepancies in what they put out and what the actual truth is. This is another example. So this is one where, so this person, he was arrested, New Jersey man targeting Jews, warned, and this was happening 2022. Okay, this is back in April, right? And this was another one of those ones where they wanted to tie it back to the Black Hebrew Israelites, right? So, when we started looking through, some of these news reports, you'll start to see them referencing the ADL a lot. And when you see that, I would encourage you to go and double check what they say, especially when they're talking about Black people, because it says like Anti-Defamation League of New York and New Jersey. The suspect, it says according to the Anti-Defamation League. So according to what they're saying, they're saying that the suspect made anti-Semitic marks during his arrest, right? So probably, this is where why you're seeing a discrepancy. This is why you're seeing a discrepancy between what the ADL is putting out and what, organizations like the FBI are tracking, because there's, Anti-Defamation League is saying that these guys are saying anti-Semitic marks, but when you go over to the United States Department of Justice, who has a write-up on the same incident, you don't find those same remarks in the Department of Justice's write-up. Therein lie a discrepancy. Excuse me. Take a drink of water. So, and if we keep going, fam, And this is another one that I had posted earlier, right? So Staten Island BB gun attack, right? This is the one where Jonathan Greenblatt was on the Breakfast Club, and as he was on the Breakfast Club, it's funny when you hear him kind of try to spin this. He started off by saying, "Speaking of the Black Hebrew Israelites, there was a, kind of paraphrasing, there was a, this BB gun incident," and he starts describing it and stuff like that, and then of course, the infamous call sign is that these people always say something anti-Semitic. Like these people always say, "Well, we did it because you're not the real Jews," or something like that. They always kind of add that on there. But when you go and look at the details of the case and you try to find that according to another reference, you don't find it. But in any case, this was one of the ones where they tried to say that this was, or Adam Greenblatt tried to say that this was a black man. And as you can see on the screen, this was a Caucasian, redheaded. His name was Jason Kish. And so if his Kish is a Jewish name, right? So he might be a Jewish guy, based off of his name, his surname. But this was one of the attacks that's happening against the African Israelite community by the ADL, right? They're trying to assign certain, acts of violence against our community. And that's why I'm raising the alarm, family, to tell you, it's like, hey fam, this is dangerous what these guys are doing. This is really dangerous, because this was what happened back in like the 1915s and 1920s, when the Rosewoods and the Black Wall Streets and all this other stuff. I got some of that stuff in an upcoming video, and I'm just touching the surface on it. But this is how those lynchings and those massacres were justified, and by false accusations that were put out there. And you'll see, I think I have the slide on here, but the NAACP called this out because they were around back then, right? And this is the next one. Let's see, New Jersey City shooters, right? This is the one that he also said, he being Jonathan Greenblatt, he was on the Breakfast Club, also said that this was done by Black Hebrew Israelites, right? And I played the clip from, hopefully I can pronounce his name right, from the Attorney General. This is the New Jersey Attorney General, I believe, Grewal, and that's where he said, said with both shooters, he says, we have, let's see, it says, while both shooters have expressed interest in the Black Hebrew Israelites 4 years ago, at Black Hebrew Israelite movement, said neither appear to have established formal links to the movement. There you go. So with that being said, fam, there should have been no reason why Jonathan Greenblatt, to say on the Breakfast Club that this was committed by Black Hebrew Israelites. There should have been no reason. Actually, this lie is actually still on the ADL's website today. Like today, they still have it on there. So, like I said, fam, it just goes to show that we are being targeted using using these lies to try to redefine things of African Israelites or Israelites of color, or whatever description you want to use. But they're trying to redefine it as some sort of violent group, which we are not. We don't have we don't have the lessons, we don't have the teachings to do that. Neither is there a history of doing that. So if you're new to the faith, to this awakening, and you're hearing stuff like that, know for sure, family, that it is a lie, and that there is a reason why this particular organization is putting forth this lie. But before I kind of go into a little bit of that, this is what I was talking about before. This is from the NAACP's website, the history of lynching. I really do encourage everyone to kind of go out there and take a look to see the history, of lynching that was around during the late 1800s, early to mid 1900s. This is something that I don't know if this makes it into our history books, that's being taught in school, but it's very important history, because we need to learn from it, fam, so that we don't repeat the mistakes of our forefathers. But let me see if I can move this. Hang on one second. Just give me 1 second, fam. I'm just going to try to clear the screens. There we go. Hit the icon there. But here we go. But yeah, this is from the NAACP's website. I've read it before, but just to read it again here, it says a typical lynching involved a criminal accusation. That's the first thing, fam. Just like if you had like a how-to guide on how to lynch somebody, this is the how-to guide on how to lynch, so-called African Americans, so-called Negroes. And this is why it's so concerning when we see Jonathan Greenblatt follow this how-to guide, because we see them, following this highlighted line where it says a typical lynching involves a criminal accusation, right? The next step is the arrest. And the third step is the assembly of a mob, right? The assembly of a mob. Those three things, fam, those three things are usually the steps that go along with, the lynching or some sort of violent act against our community. So as Black folks, anytime we see this, fam, we need to, we need to resist it, right? We need to fight back on it. And it's disheartening that this sort of stuff is happening and we don't hear anything from the NAACP. Like, that was one of the things that we talked about at the conference, and that is, when all this Kyrie stuff was happening and there was outrage among the Black community, like across the board, like this wasn't a Israelite thing. This was like a people of color thing, right? Where was the NAACP? Like, there was no other organization to stand up and say, hey, that's enough. Hey, we got to, to kind of keep them honest, right? To say, hey, these accusations that you're making, they're not all true. Hey, if you're going to make it here, you got to, and you haven't made this, basically just keep them honest. You can't say it over here, but not say it over there, that sort of thing. You can't show preferential treatment for one group as opposed to another, right? But we needed the NAACP for that, but they were not there, man. They were not there. So that is a gap right now, in the Israelite community, in my opinion. But let me show you something real quick, fam, because before we go over to the David and Goliath thing, because maybe you're wondering, so why are we seeing this from the ADL, right? Why are we seeing this from this organization? And what I told our family at the conference, and that is, Black folks don't know. Oh, let me say this before I say that. Many of our brothers and brothers and sisters are standing on the sideline, whether they're Christians, whether they're Muslims, because they're seeing this attack against the Israelite community, thinking that it's not going to impact them, right? They're saying that, well, hey, we think differently than you do, right? So as long as it doesn't come over here, we're not concerned. That is a mistake. And thank you. I see this Sister Jewel Hill put in there. It's like the NAACP is not for us. It is not for us. You're right about that, sis. But I was saying, hang on one second, fam. Oh, there we go. But the thing is that you have these groups on the side, standing on the sideline, our own brothers and sisters on the sideline, letting this play out because they think that it's not going to impact them, right? But let me just give you an example. So when the ADL went after Kanye, right? For better for worse, we don't, whether you agree with Kanye or not, sometimes he's off the rails, right? But whether you agree with him or not, irregardless of that, when they came after Kanye, right, and they, the ADL came and approached Adidas. I mean, you have Jonathan Greenblatt giving a whole dissertation on how they caused all this, how they caused Adidas to drop Kanye, and how Adidas, they had some concerns about it because you can't, if you're a big company, you can't just do things without impacting other people. But that's just it, fam. So when Adidas finally folded under the pressure and they terminated their contract with Adidas, I don't know if there were a lot of mainstream media outlets that actually picked up the story that when Adidas was forced to do that, they were also forced to lay off 143 people. Let me say that again. They were forced to lay off 143 people, right, just before the heathens, just before the holidays, right? Just before Thanksgiving and Christmas, they had to lay off these 143 people. And what I tell people, it's not just the 143 people. Remember, these are people that have families, right? A lot of these people have families. They have, sons, daughters, wives, housing, houses, mortgage payments to make, right? And that income was boom, taken away, without a moment's notice, because it was immediate, because when they terminated the contract with Kanye, it was done, immediately. And so, and I asked our brothers and sisters at the conference, I was like, so do you think, most of those 143 people were Israelites, or do you think they were Christians? So more than likely, most of those 143 were Christians, right? That, were, and some of them were probably, African American, some of them probably Caucasian, some of them probably may have been Chinese or Hispanic, right? Probably a whole demographic, various different demographics of people that were impacted by the ADL. And now they have to, find another job, find another means of supporting their family, right? And so this speaks to, those that are waiting on the sidelines or standing on the sidelines and watching this play out, because you're not necessarily of the faith of an Israelite. However, if you let this play out and you do nothing, you risk the impact of this showing up at your doorstep, whether you like it or not. So, I would encourage you to at least, keep these guys honest. When you see a lie, call it out. When you see them, infringing on First Amendment rights of, whether the person be an Israelite or a Christian, call it out, fam. Don't let the ADL run roughshod through the Black community as a whole. But back to what I was saying, fam. Why is this happening? Why is this one group, seemingly to come against right now it's against the African Israelite community? And I must stress, right now is the African Israelite community. But in the past, fam, these guys have come against the Black community. And this is when you have to go back in history. And the reason why, we kind of let the Breakfast Club would ignorantly let Jonathan Greenblatt sit comfortably in his chair and ask him these softball questions and not ask the tough questions, and to let him get away with those lies. The only reason, and this is my guess, is that they don't know the history. Like on the Breakfast Club, Jonathan Greenblatt mentioned, he brought up, they asked, so what is the ADL? Where did it come from? When did it come? When was it founded or something like that, right? And then Jonathan Greenblatt goes into the spiel about, where it came from, right? And he talks about the first thing that they'll tell you is that, there was a Jew that was lynched, right? Leo Frank. And he said they'll say things like he was, incorrectly lynched, right? Wrongly accused. But the part that they leave out is that, first of all, what they're saying is that what they're not telling you is that what the ADL or the ADL's forefathers, which is B'nai B'rith, it's a different organization. They were trying to put the murder that Leo Frank was accused of. They were trying to put it on a Black person, and and this is where I actually posted or read I posted the reading of the closing arguments of Leo Frank's defense team, right? But the B'nai B'rith defense team and family, it is racist. These guys were racist, fam. And if you want to understand why they are racist, I encourage you to we do have a video out that's going to speak to that. And it's just going to speak to a little bit of their history and family. Let me tell you, they are the main protagonists of Black folks as a whole. I'm telling you, we'll have to wait for the video, but let me do this, fam. I will show you a clip. And I'm going to share with you, this is a clip from the upcoming video. It doesn't necessarily have a title just yet. You just have to figure out the title for it. But this is the title, and it's going to go into the, Most High Willing, the history of the ADL, and, why the Black community should be, paying attention to what's going on. So here's a clip, fam. ADL, also known as the Anti-Defamation League. To tell the story of the Anti-Defamation League, we must first tell the story of the Ku Klux Klan. Why? Because they're connected. The story begins at the end of the Civil War. The Union North had won, and the Confederate South had lost. Southern cities burned to ashes by General Sherman helped deal a fatal blow to the South. And according to Jewish lawyer and researcher Robert M. Rosen, many Germans filled the ranks of the Confederate Army, joining the fight to keep the vestiges of slavery alive. And most of these Jews were Ashkenazi Jewish immigrants from Murtha, Germany. Their names recorded in the annals of history, with roughly 3,000 Jewish names recorded and cataloged as soldiers in the Confederate Army. All right, fam. But yeah, Most High willing, we'll get that one out to you. Like I said, it's a really dark history, fam. And definitely share that one out. Most High willing when it comes out. So, but all right. So let's set that aside, fam. So just to kind of do a brief recap. So we know that there's a new group that's coming against this awakening, that's trying to stop it. We can see the these various meetings, these various committees that are being spun up. And we're definitely going to have to put this on our prayer list, right? Put this on our prayer list. But one of the things I did want to bring up, fam, and that is, the reason why I bring up David and Goliath, it has to do with who's here in the U.S. Right. It has to do with who's here in the U.S. And if you don't know who's here in the U.S., again, I want you to check out, Reclaiming the Thrones, because one of the things that we prove in the movie, and that is we prove to you who they were taking in these slave ships. Eventually we're going to also explain to you, who came over here as indentured servants as well. But long story short, fam, you actually have the physical blood descendants of King David here in the United States, and we can prove it. I'm gonna say it again. You actually have the physical blood descendants of King David living here amongst us in these United States, right? And that's why when we hit that's why I keep telling people, it's like, when we hit our 400 years, that's when all hell broke loose, right? In 2019, right, just before the pandemic hit, just before the impeachments and all this other, the forest fires that burned up half of the U.S. Fish were showing up on the coast of Florida, the red tide and all this other stuff. You had locusts and Euphrates drying up. Like all this stuff before it happened. We hit our 400 years, all this stuff kicked off, right? And there's a reason why it kicked off. What I tell people, there's a reason why when we hit our 400 years, all hell broke loose. And it has to do with, you literally have the descendants of King David here in these United States. But that's neither here nor there as far as, I'm not necessarily the purpose of this lesson, but just want you to know that, fam, that, as King David, as the descendants of King David, let's take a look to see how our forefather reacted when he was being, when he found himself in a situation where he was facing a Goliath. Because that's where we are today, fam. We all of a sudden, it's kind of like I told the fam at the conference. It's like a video game, right? You beat the boss on level 1, then you go to level 2, and now we have this new boss, bigger, stronger boss that shows up on the next level, right? So let's take a look to see how our forefather handled, being placed against Goliath. And for that, let's take a look at Zechariah chapter 9, and I have 15 on the screen, but let's back up a little bit further here. Let's start at verse 9. So, and the purpose of reading these scriptures is to show you that the sling and the stone, right? The sling in the stone was an instrument of war, right? It wasn't, nowadays when you think of a sling, you think of a stick that has that little rubber band in between the two. No, fam, we're not talking about that. We're talking about a full-fledged slingshot. And I do, most I will, I do have a video clip in this presentation to show you, just to kind of redefine what these things look like and sounded like, and if you, like what I told families, like if you were to get into a time machine and go back and actually have seen this Goliath versus David versus Goliath event play out, you would actually see David roll up, and then you would hear something that sounded like a gun, and then you would see Goliath slump down. And I was joking with fam. I was like, I believe King David implemented the first drive-by on Goliath. But we'll come to that here in a few minutes. But again, just like I said, the purpose of reading these verses is that I want you to see the importance of the sling and the stone, even in prophecy. So we know that our forefather King David used it, but now we're going to take a look at the sling and the stone in prophecy, right? And so we're at Zechariah, I said 9, and we're going to start at verse 9. It says, "Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, thy king cometh unto thee. He is just and having salvation, lowly, and riding upon an ass, and upon a colt in a fold of an ass. And I will cut off the chariot from Ephraim and the horse from Jerusalem, and the battle bow shall be cut off. And he shall speak peace unto the heathen, and his dominion shall be from sea even to sea, and from river even to the ends of the earth. As for thee also, by the blood of thy covenant, I have set forth thy prisoners out of the pit wherein is no water. Turn you to the stronghold, you prisoners of hope. Even today do I declare that I will render double unto thee." Hallelujah. And it says, verse 13, when I have bent Judah for me, filled the bowl with Ephraim, and raised up thy sons, O Zion, against thy sons, O Greece. I need to read that again, fam, right? Because this is one of those prophecies where, we got to keep it 100. So verse 13, it says, when I have bent Judah for me, filled the bowl with Ephraim, and raised up thy sons, O Zion, against thy sons, O Greece. I didn't put it in there. And it says, and made thee as the sword of a mighty man. Verse 14, and Yahuwah shall be seen over them, and his arrow shall go forth as lightning, and Yahuwah shall blow the trumpet, and shall go with whirlwinds of the south. Verse 15, and Yahuwah Zabaoth shall defend them, and they shall devour and subdue with sling stones. Let me say that again. It says, and Yahuwah Zabaoth shall defend them, and they shall devour and subdue. Not with sword and shields, fam. With what? With sling stones. With sling stones. So, and actually, so I have something blocking my screen here. Hang on one second, see if I can. There we go. And they shall drink and make a noise as through wine, and they shall be filled like bowls and as the corners of an altar. All right. So as you can see, fam, the sling stones play an important part, right? They are playing an important part. And what I was telling our brothers and sisters at the conference, I was like, think of it like, as rock, paper, scissors, right? Rock is great for scissors. Scissors is great for paper. Paper is great for rock, right? And what you're going to find out, fam, is sling stones is great for giants. A sling stone is great for giants. Think of Goliath as that big pair of scissors, because he has that big sword, right? Talk about he had a sword and an armor bearer, a shield bearer. But then you have David grabbing that rock, those smooth stones, right? And as we'll find out, is that is the perfect weapon for taking out a Goliath. And for that, so let's take a look at 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 40. And actually, I think we might back up a little bit further just to get some context. So let's start at verse 34, as you see on the screen. It says, as 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 34. And it says, and David said unto Shaul, thy servant kept his father's sheep, and there came a lion and a bear and took a lamb out of the flock. And I went up after him. And I told fam, I was like, you got to see the character of David. A lion, how many of you all would go after a lion if it came and snatched your dog? Like if you was out walking, lion jumped out the bushes, snatched your dog, ran off into the woods. Would you go after him? Most folks would say no. They throw those deuces and go to the pet store. Right. But here's King David. Of course, he's not king at this time, but just to show his disposition, lion comes, takes his sheep, and it says, verse 35, it says, and I went out after him and smote it and delivered it out of his mouth. And when he arose against me, I guess he knocked it out or something. It says, I caught him by his beard and smote him again, smote him and slew him. It says, verse 36, it says, thy servant slew both the lion and the bear. So I guess eventually a bear came along, and it says, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be as one of them, seeing he hath defied the armies of the living Elohim. Verse 37 says, Daud said moreover, the Yahuwah that delivered me out of the paw of the lion and out of the paw of the bear, he will deliver me out of the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said unto David, go, and Yahuwah be with you. And Saul armed David with his armor and put on his an helmet of brass and upon his head, and also he armed him with a coat of mail. And David girded his sword upon his armor, and he essayed to go. And it says, for he had not proved it. In other words, he didn't want to go because he was being armed with weaponry that he had not gone to battle with. Oh, come on, fam. You got to see the lesson in that one. He was armed with weapons that he had not gone to battle with, that he had not proved them with, right? How many of you would go into war with a gun you hadn't shot yet, with the sword that you haven't swung yet, right? So David's like, no, you can have these back. And it says, and David said unto Saul, I cannot go with these, for I have not proved them, right? And David put them off. He took them off, and he said, and he took his staff in his hand, and he chose him 5 smooth stones. And of course, the story, fam. He didn't need all 5, right? But he chose 5 smooth stones out of the brook and put them in a shepherd's bag, with which he had, even in the script. And his sling was in his hand, and he drew near the Philistine. All right. But so let's go to, let's see here, verse 34. I'm sorry, verse 41. And it says, and the Philistine came on and drew near unto David, and the man that bare the shield went before him. And it says, and when the Philistine looked about and saw David. So this big dude came out. He saw little David. He says he disdained him, for he was but a youth and ruddy and of a fair countenance. And the Philistine said unto David, am I a dog that thou comest to me with staves? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. And the Philistine said unto David, come, and I will give thy flesh unto the fowls of the air and to the beasts of the field. All right, fam. This is where you got to check in, right? Let's check out David to see, like I said, you gotta see the disposition and the character of David when he's going up against a big boy. Look at him. It says, verse 45, it says, then David said to the Philistine, I think, man, look, listen, fam. It says, thou comest to me with the sword and with the spear and with the shield. But I come to thee in the name of Yahuwah Zabaoth, the Yahuwah of armies of Israel, whom you have defiled. This day will Yahuwah deliver thee into my hand, and I will smite thee and take thine head from thee. I will give the carcasses of the host of the Philistines this day unto the fowls of the air and to the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a Yahuwah in Israel. Man, fam, David's cold, fam. I'm telling you, David's cold. He's built of a different cloth. Like David's that dude that, you know, things go down, you're gonna want a David in your midst, because David might be the one to kick it off. But let's just take a look at verse 45, and it says, "And all this assembly shall know that Yahuwah saveth not with the sword and the spear." Man, he looking at Goliath's sword and the spear. Why he's saying this, right? You know, giving them the eyes like that. All will know, and all this assembly shall know that Yahuwah saveth not with the sword and the spear. Probably looking at his sword and the spear, right? It says, "For the battle is Yahuwah's, and he will give you into my hand." Fam. And just like I said, fam, you got to know who's here in the States. Why them 400 years kicked off when you hit your 400 years. Because some of y'all on this live got the blood of King David flowing through you. That's why you got that about you. But let's keep reading. It says, what was that? Verse 48, and it says, and it came to pass when the Philistine arose, and let me change my screen because this thing keep popping up. Now it's super small. But anyway, it says, and when it came to pass when the Philistine arose and came and drew near to meet David, look what David did, fam. It says that David hasted and ran towards him. Come on now, you got to picture this, fam. So this big dude started marching. David started running toward him, like come on, right? So David starts, he ran towards him to meet the Philistine. And let me advance this slide. Let's see if I got 49 on the next page. Yeah, I do. Okay. So fight's about to kick off. David running towards him. And the thing especially when you start looking at these various videos about the sling, fam, of course, like the more accurate the closer you get, of course, the more accurate you're gonna be, right? And it's like I don't know anything about the velocity of it, but it seemed like, fam, like he was lining Goliath up. He was setting him up. But let's read verse 49. It says, "And David put his hand in his bag and took thence a stone and slang it and smote the Philistine in his head." And this is, fam, it says that the stone sunk into his forehead and he fell upon his face to the earth. Now, again, when some of us think of slingshots and stones, we're thinking about that stick, it's got the little U at the top with the little band, the band in between with the little pad to put the little stone on. That's what folks be going out and like trying to shoot squirrels and rabbits with it. Family, this isn't that, right? This isn't that. And this is kind of like why when I came across this video, I was like, fam, you got to see this. You got to see this. So let me show you a video of a person with a sling stone, with the slingshot that David used when he went up against Goliath, and why I say this was a drive-by shooting. And the sound that you hear from the slingshot and stone is real. It's not anything that's added onto this. Okay. All right. So here is the video of a slingshot. that Dawood would use. That's real, fam. Picture David in front of Goliath. That's how it sounds.
Go, Richie.
I see how it sounds like a gun?
Ooh.
So that's why I say, fam, if you jumped into the time machine and you saw that event happen, you would have seen these two armies on either side. You would have seen David walk up to Goliath with his big spear and his shield, and you would have heard pop, and Goliath would have went down, right? But hallelujah, like I said, paper, scissors, rocks. Rock is good for scissors. Scissors is good for paper. And what you'll see is that a sling stone or a slingshot is good for taking out a giant. Hallelujah. So the takeaway here, fam, and let me just make sure I don't have any other slides here. Hang on one second. Let me jump back over to my presentation. Let me add it to the stream. Okay, yeah, I got that. Yeah, King David was king of the streets. King of the streets. So fam, like I said, I don't want to keep you long here, fam. But just know that, as we move into this next, as we've already moved into this next phase of the awakening, and the Most High is quickening, this awakening. More and more of our family and friends are waking up, and like I said, you'll probably start having family and friends approach you about, hey, what does it mean to be an Israelite, and all this other stuff. You'll start to hear, I would expect, these attacks that we're seeing from like these organizations like the ADL to, only get intensify or get worse. And so we have to take out our 5 smooth stones. For some of us, our 5 smooth stones is that prayer closet in the house. It's that fasting that we do once a week. It's the worship, that we do in the assembly. Put some prayer on it, fam. We're gonna put some prayer on this thing, right? And also we're gonna, like I said, you start seeing the, this character assassination where they're trying to redefine, these, people of color who believe that they're Israel as being some sort of violent group, which is, like I said, it is not a thing. That's not any sort of doctrine that we teach. Neither is that something that any of us do, here in the States, that we believe that when we come out of this, this Egypt that we're in, that it's going to be by the hand of the Most High. It's not going to be by anybody shooting anybody. You know what I mean? It's not going to be by any violent means on our behalf. So if you hear any, news clips or anything coming from the ADL or anybody else trying to portray Israelites being something that the Bible doesn't tell us to do, it is a lie, fam. It's a lie. But all right, fam, like I said, I kept you long enough. Hey, thanks for joining. Thanks for dialing in. Big shout out and shalom to everybody that joined in and joined in the chat and took the time to listen. So for those of you that are off tomorrow, enjoy your extra day off. Like I said, hopefully that video that I shared earlier about the the history of the ADL and why Black folks need to be paying attention. Hopefully we'll get that out sooner rather than later. And like I said, just make sure you share that with family and friends whenever it comes out. So all right, fam. We'll love you, fam. Thank you for joining. You guys have a great and awesome rest of your day, and stay blessed, family, and shalom.